Hello and welcome to First Kick Seahawks, the show where we prepare you for the first kick of every play by game day. And you might be surprised to see me. I'm a little surprised to see me. Short story. I had to think about it. And even though I was being threatened online and in various places, even in person after I posted the episode saying I wasn't going to record First Kick Seahawks anymore, somebody threatened my life. Anyways, so I'll talk about it more on the Keep Kicking podcast, but I determined that I like doing this. I like doing First Kick Seahawks. I like bringing content to you, and it's just something I like to do. So we're going to do this. If you want to know more about that, I'm going to post an episode of Keep Kicking podcast later tonight, and I'll talk about that. Anyways, let's get into it. A lot happened this week. Tyrel Dodson, gone. Connor Williams, gone. 49ers coming in with Christian McCaffrey, right? Jordan Mason still kind of gimpy. Nick Bosa, they say he's gimpy. He's got a hip pointer, right? He's probably going to be fine, right? But as we know, Brandon Ayuk, gone, right? They've been relying on Ricky Pearsall to come in and fill in that route. There's a lot of questions about what's going to happen in this next rematch, and a lot of Seahawk fans are expecting us to get our butts kicked. But if you remember that last game, that last time that we played the 49ers had a lot going for them. That was the third game that we played in 10 days, right? We played the Lions on Monday. Then we played the Giants, who came out of nowhere and beat us. And it took a blocked punt or a blocked field goal to do it. And then we go up against this 49ers squad that had rest and didn't have nearly as many injuries as us. And even though Jordan Mason got injured, we still couldn't tackle to save our lives. Well, we have a new-ish linebacking core, right? Jerome Baker, gone. Right? We now have Ernest Jones, who looked versus the Bills. He only got to be in our practice rooms for like 3 days. Then he comes in, gets his butt kicked by the Bills. It's whatever. Tyrel Dodson got moved over to Will. He is now out of Will. We got Tyrese Knight now going to be moving into the Will position. I believe Mike McDonald said Tyrese Knight is going to be in there. That's my guy, right? I think he could be a lemon. This is the opportunity to see if he will be a lemon. Having a chance to sit on the bench for a while, he's got good acceleration. The big question was, can he get off of blocks? But Trent Williams is kind of hurt right now. We might not have Trent Williams in this game. If you remember what I said before the season started, I thought that we were going to split a game with the 49ers. I acknowledged that we were playing them on a Thursday, third game in 10 days. But I said that the big reason that we could lose or win that game was if Trent Williams or Christian McCaffrey, I keep wanting to call him Christian Michael. if Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey were going to be in that game. If you remember, at the start of the season, they were having contract negotiations. The conversation was that Trent Williams was going to sit out. Historically, the last 5 or 6 years, Trent Williams has not had a completely healthy season, and this could be the week where he misses it because of an injury. And so he did play that game and played really, really well, even though he technically should have been ejected for performing a throat punch on one of our guys. So if we go up against a team that, sure, they got McCaffrey back, and we're going to get into that, but they don't have Trent Williams, this could be that game where it's flipped, right? I thought either we were going to beat them on that Thursday game because they don't have Trent Williams, or we were going to beat them later in the season because that's when we were going to win with the health week, right? Because we were going to come out of a bye and we were probably going to be the healthier, more prepared team purely based off of that, because the 49ers tend to kind of fall apart. So this is a good opportunity for us to take advantage of a 49ers team that is losing pieces left and right, and even though they just got their star player back, signs haven't necessarily shown that he is going to bring it all together. Let's get in to this injury report first and foremost for the Seattle Seahawks, courtesy of Field Goals. Friday, look at this injury report. When was the last time the Seahawks had an injury report like this? Nobody's on it. No Abe Lucas, no DK Metcalf, no Draymond Jones, Boye Mafe wasn't on it, right? Thursday, sure, but nobody to speak of. What's most exciting about this is that we got DK Metcalf back, and even though JSN had 180 yards last week and just managed to take the top off of a really bad Rams defense, and it wasn't enough, right? We still need to be able to split the field, and it's nice to have a DK Metcalf out there to make sure that their cornerbacks have to man up and respect this guy underneath, right? Not necessarily over the top. This has been the big argument amongst the Seahawks community as well, that we're not always seeing him covered in Tampa too, right? They're not always putting a safety over the top. Well, they do for like the first 5 steps, and then they'll peel him off. But what you'll see is they'll see an underneath defender or a nickel hand off up the seam, so that when DK Metcalf is running over the hash marks, there's an underneath defender, meaning that Geno can't throw that route, right? But you need somebody like DK to occupy that space so that somebody can get open on the other side. And so also, if the guy on the other side is occupied, the third guy is then open. Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant. It's all got to work in cohesion. So having DK Metcalf back, who can take off the top and then force certain defensive formations, that's a huge, huge boon for us. The biggest boon, though, is Abe Lucas. And that's also a big question. A big question. If you've watched my show for a while now, you'll remember at the draft, I said Abe Lucas is not going to start until after the bye week. And here we are. It is after the bye week. He is expected to start at right tackle, and not a moment too soon. We have gone through a set of rotisserie meat right before Thanksgiving of all the different forms of guys who have been plucked by every single defense at right tackle. And with a chain link fence of an offensive line, you never really know the chicken and egg scenario of, is it the right tackle that's making everything bad, which is then making the right guard bad, which is then causing the center, who is now retired, to snap the ball too fast because he's feeling overwhelmed? Is it the coaching? What is it? At the very least, we know that Abe Lucas is a smart player, but he's probably going to be rusty. So I want to preface that when you put an Abe Lucas, who historically has had a bad knee, up against a Nick Bosa, don't expect things to be that much better. But when we had Stone Forsythe go out, who was arguably, who was literally the worst offensive lineman in the league, and it wasn't close, get replaced by Michael Jarrell, the line looked better. It was still bottom 3 offensive line in just about every statistical category, right? But it did look better. It was able to block a little longer. We were able to create running lanes a teeny tiny bit better just because our right tackle wasn't getting blown up. And a lot of those pressures of the 35 or so that Stone Forsythe had before he finally got benched and put on IR We're against Nick Bosa on that Thursday night game. I think he had 9 versus Stone Forsythe. When we put in Michael Jarrell, he looked all right against the Falcons. He looked terrible against the Bills, but everyone looked terrible against the Bills, but he still didn't look as bad as Stone Forsythe. When we put in George Fant, he looked bad, but he looked like he was coming off of an injury. If we put in an Abe Lucas, if he's better than George Fant, that's at least a little bit better. Maybe instead of being a bottom 3 offensive line, we can be a bottom 5 offensive line, which that doesn't sound great until you realize that the only other quarterbacks that are being pressured as much as Geno Smith are Jacoby Brissett and Drake May. And then I think also Jameis Winston and then the other guy whose name is eluding me because I don't like to think of him. Yeah, but the Browns have a good offensive line historically. The Patriots have an atrocious offensive line. Our offensive line should not be bad considering the amount of product and amount of cap. Well, not the amount of cap, but the amount of capital as far as draft picks, and amount of trade that we had put into it. So the fact that Connor Williams retired from center, if you didn't know he retired this past week, is a bit alarming, right? We have Oluwatimi coming in. Last year, people were really excited about Oluwatimi. I believe he was one of the, if not the best centers in his class. The big knock on Oluwatimi is that he's slightly undersized. We have seen, though, from centers that if you can just pay attention, if you can just perform your job the right way and make the right calls and read the defenders in rhythm, you don't need to be the most powerful offensive lineman amongst the 5. So with Connor Williams, routinely, he was just straight up getting beat or he was making the wrong calls. So with a combination of Oluwatimi and Abe Lucas, is that enough for our offensive line to be fixed? Connor Williams, he's coming in from the Dolphins, supposedly an all-pro, doesn't play like an all-pro here. I've been saying that's a coaching thing. I think that's Scott Huff. But maybe it's a preparation thing. Maybe Connor Williams just isn't good at calling out defenders. He doesn't know how to read a fire zone stunt. He can't find a pirate stunt, right? If somebody is slashing across the line, he doesn't know how to do a handoff, right? Maybe there's just something wrong with his ability to read certain defenses and he's getting worked. If Oluwatimi is a good study and he's been sitting there with Jason Peters, he's been on the roster for the last few weeks, right? In the study room, learning how to be a good player so that if he ever gets his opportunity, he can go out there and perform. We could have a good player in Oluwatimi. Historically, if you're an undersized player, like a Tyler Lockett or a Doug Baldwin, right? You have to be a smarter player than an athletic player. There are limits, right? Joey Hunt, where he's so undersized that he's just going to get completely swamped over, right? But if you are just a good tactical player and you're big enough and you're athletic enough, if he can just communicate with the guys next to him, maybe things will settle down. We've had a bye week where assumedly, I presume, right, he has been the starter communicating. If he just found out on Tuesday, then if I was the coaching staff, I'd probably be pissed, right? If Connor Williams decided, his heart's just not in it after the bye week, that kind of sucks because he just let everybody down, but it is what it is. Next man up, got to go compete. If Abe Lucas has a good knee and he's ready to go and he plays like what we know he can be, which is at least a Pro Bowler, that should help balance out Charles Cross because suddenly the number values within the guard positions aren't being overloaded, so he can get help on overloads or in one-on-one situations, if he's getting teed off on, you can slide a guard or a tight end over to help him. It just starts to create a chain reaction, which is then mirrored over to the linebacker position, right? If it's true that Tyrel Dodson was the problem and he is just so bad that he's not worth even keeping on the roster, that's what's crazy, is that they decided to not even keep somebody that they signed on the roster who's been healthy, right? He's like leading the team in tackles, or he's up there. I don't have the exact tackle count. Roll with me, right? They decided to not even keep a healthy starting player who is one of the best players on the Bills last year on a prove-it contract. They just decided, screw it, get out of here. That could mean two things. Either A, they have no trust in him, or B, they're planning for the season to be over anyways, so they want the guys that they do like, who are planning on being here in 2025, to play the rest of the season that they're going to lose, so that they can have more experience working with that player, because why waste the time? Which one do you think it is? Because we're still neck and neck with the rest of the division. We're only like, 2 games behind, 1 game behind. We still have the game with the 49ers, a game with the Rams, and 2 games with the Cardinals. It's not like we've lost the division yet. If we were 4 games or 3 games behind the division, sure, I could understand why we would let him go and then yet let the young kids play. I think we let Tyrel Dodson go because he's just that bad in our system. There's got to be some communication issues or what, but he's making the players next to him play poorly. So at that point, just put in Tyrese Knight. Put in a guy that you actually wanted instead of a guy that you signed because, well, he's technically experienced. You know, if the coaches prefer this kid, go for it. During my offseason evaluation of players, I didn't do Tyrel Dodson as deeply because I didn't see the point. When we did Jerome Baker, there was only one real connection: Vic Fangio. We had a defense that was currently built with Vic Fangio in mind. When Sean Desai and Clint Hurt built a defense for Pete Carroll, the idea was we wanted to look like Vic Fangio. All right, so we're going to have our safeties flying around, and we're going to go to cover 6 that switches over to cover 7, and we're going to have our linebackers like Jordan Brooks move in a very specific way up seams and trade off on steps 3 through 7. And when you look at Jerome Baker, he briefly worked with Vic Fangio for about a year or 2. So my logic was, well, maybe they brought him in because Jerome Baker is used to transitioning to a Vic Fangio system. So maybe they brought him in because they can transition out of the Vic Fangio system into whatever Mike McDonald wants to do. But when you looked at Ernest Jones, when we evaluated Ernest Jones, connections all over the place. Basically, every single coach that Ernest Jones has ever had has some type of connection to Mike McDonald. It's a little crazy, right? So when Mike McDonald asks him to do something, or when his linebacker coach says, "Hey kid, I need you to do something," he knows exactly what that coach is telling him to do, right? You don't need to try to over-explain it. And so when you look at Tyrel Dodson, there were no connections to the Bills. It didn't make any sense to bring this guy in other than, well, he was good on the Bills. All right? I thought that he was going to be a backup. I didn't know why we brought him in other than, well, we had a roster spot to fill, so Tyrese Knight's probably going to beat him in camp and get the starting job, and then it didn't happen. So there must be something to this, right? And it just didn't perform. I mean, it started off all right. Didn't end up doing well once teams kind of figured us out. I'm excited because Tyrese Knight, he reminds me of a tall London Fletcher. And Kirk Olivadotti, our linebackers coach, coached London Fletcher for years. All right, so keep that in mind when we're talking about how pulling out pieces and putting in pieces can have a chain reaction on this upcoming 49ers game, right? They could be losing one of their best offensive linemen, and they're already having issues. And we're just trying to get our center pieces together, right? Leslie Frazier in the offseason, he talked about how he really wanted, he and Mike McDonald really wanted our team to be built from the trenches backwards, right? Defensive line back to the linebackers, then to defensive backs, which means that they want to be built offensive line out towards the wide receivers. And right now, when you look at the defense, it's built with a bunch of good defensive line players, a bunch of linebackers, which we're still kind of plugging and playing, right? We got Tyrese Knight, Nwosu's injured, but we drafted, we traded for Ernest Jones, so that kind of makes sense now considering the coaching connections. And then we have a bunch of really, really good defensive backs. But then on the offensive side of the ball, all of the talent is really in the receiving core, and our offensive line has played putrid. Is that because our coaching is bad, or is that because of the trenches? Well, we're about to find out, especially if Nick Bosa is healthy. When you look at this 49ers injury report, he has a hip injury. Kevin Givens, who I don't think we played last time, is out. Chavarius Ward, who I don't believe we played last time, is also out. And come on, just give me the actual rotation. Well, we're just gonna go through it. Here it is. Yuri Gross-Matos. It's questionable. And then Latour Jr. is doubtful. Aaron Banks is still questionable. He's probably going to play. All right. The big thing on this list, of course, is Trent Williams is questionable. I expect him to be a game day decision. Their punter is out. They have a new punter. We returned a punt on them the last time we played, and they've already been struggling all season long. And then Moody, their kicker, I thought he was on the list, but I guess it was in fact their punter. Moody has been having issues with consistency in his kicking, so it could be in a big game tomorrow. Moody could miss another kick against the Seattle Seahawks, and if their punter is not up to snuff, we could see another big punt return against them. It wouldn't be the first time that the Seahawks have had big punt returns all season. After a week of rest, right, our special teams unit, they tend to be the unit that gets the most banged up aside from the defense and the offensive line. I would like to see that. I want to talk a bit about the trends that the 49ers are going through right now, regardless of injury. When we go to Pro Football Reference, this is their game against Tampa Bay. They did beat Tampa Bay 23-20, right? They only have a 5-4 record, so it's not like they're miles ahead of us. This is a must-win game for the 49ers, which kind of explains why they're so tense. Christian McCaffrey finally came back. And the thing about Christian McCaffrey coming back is he had 13 rushing attempts and only 39 yards on the ground. Now, the Tampa Bay defense is not that type of defense. It's not going to punch you in the mouth. But here's what I want y'all to be afraid of. Christian McCaffrey, 6 receptions for 68 yards. That's not That's not good, friends. That's not good, friends, at all. Do you remember what made Christian McCaffrey so scary? Yeah, he could do the little runs up the middle. He could do the outside handoff. But what was really scary was the pitch play on the left side behind George Kittle, Juszczyk, and Trent Williams. Those three players specifically. So if Trent Williams is healthy, George Kittle is healthy, and Juszczyk is out there doing his thing, and we can't tackle still. If we can't tackle in space, if they got Christian McCaffrey, who's back and healthy, against Tampa Bay, going 6 for 68, expect them to have another game like that. That's not a good stat line for us to see for his first game back. Deebo Samuel also had 5 receptions, 62 yards. Juan Jennings, who's having an amazing year, underpaid. He had 7 receptions on 11 targets. Give him a Slurpee for 93 yards. Ricky Pearsall also having his big rookie showing. 4 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. George Kittle having another stellar year. 3 receptions, 57 yards, and a touchdown. I believe he has 7 touchdowns receiving on the season. You might say, is Jordan Mason going to tear us a new one? He has not been the same since that Seahawks game when he went down with an injury. They have given him reps. This last game against Tampa Bay, he had 1 rushing attempt for 5 yards. So he's come a long way from leading or being up there in the league in rushing attempts. When we go to his Pro Football Reference page, you can see right here that his yards per attempt is about where it was. Against us, it was at 8.1, which was just stellar, right? But for a while there, it was 28 attempts, 20 attempts, 19, 24, and then it starts to kind of dwindle down to 14, 9, 14, right? The last time that he hit over 89 yards was against us, and then it's just was against Arizona, right? And then it's just never quite been the same since he got injured versus us. Only 58 yards versus Kansas City, 18 yards on 6 attempts versus Dallas, and then 5 yards on 1 attempt at Tampa Bay. So don't expect Jordan Mason necessarily to have a lot. It's going to be the Christian McCaffrey show for a reason. Christian McCaffrey got paid the money this offseason for a reason. He is a different type of player. There could be a thunder and lightning if Jordan Mason was healthy, but the last few weeks since he got injured after playing us, he has not been healthy. Especially if Trent Williams is not there because he's injured, there goes a lot of the power running that they've been doing, right? Their offensive line is okay, but without one of the best offensive linemen, if not the best offensive lineman in the league, they're just not going to perform. Which brings me to then their passing game. George Kittle leads the 49ers with 7 touchdowns. Then you have Juan Jennings. What's most interesting about Juan Jennings is he does have 3 touchdowns, but he only got those in week 3 versus the LA Rams. He's otherwise been fairly quiet except for yardage, right? He's known as 3rd and long Jennings for a reason. Be wary of him constantly getting first downs. When you have the running game setting up, 3rd and short situations, and you have Deebo Samuel on one side, George Kittle on one, up in the Y, and then at one point it was Brandon Ayuk, now it's Ricky Pearsall. You have a guy left over. That's Juan Jennings. For us right now, it's apparently Tyler Lockett, who's become our third read or 4th read type of guy, right? But they have so many different targets, you can't cover everybody. And Brock Purdy is able to get through all of his reads. Juan Jennings is become that guy who is not only getting those first downs, he's also getting a lot of yardage, but he is not getting a lot of touchdowns. After that, for passing touchdowns, they only have 2 others. Deebo Samuel has 1 touchdown. Ricky Pearsall has a touchdown. He got that last week. Out of curiosity, Deebo Samuel, when did he last get a touchdown? That was against us. He had 102 yards. Yeah. So, to reiterate, when you have 12 touchdowns on the season, passing touchdowns on a season as a team, and 7 of them go to your tight end, maybe we should shut down George Kittle. Maybe we should make sure that George Kittle doesn't get the ball, because that seems to be the real threat. Stop the run. We have been getting run all over, but if Tyrel Dodson has been the problem, all we need to do is make sure that the problem isn't on the team and we let him go. Ernest Jones, go work your magic. Tyrese Knight, go be a shining armor out on the field. Let's see if we can stop the run and then just don't let George Kittle beat us. Because it's not like Deebo Samuel can do it again. It's not like Julian Love is going to, whiff twice. Surely Julian Love is not going to whiff twice and give up a gigantic pass down the sideline to Mr. Deebo Samuel. I don't want to see that. Big thing with the 49ers is they think that Nick Bosa is having a bad year. They think he is underperforming this year. I mean, everything is relative. Let's take a quick peek. Courtesy of Pro Football Reference, of course. So right now he has 5.5 sacks, 32 combined tackles, 22 of them are solo, 10 of them are assists. He has 8 tackles for loss, 15 quarterback hits, 1 fumble recovery. He also has a pass defense. He is about right on track where he was last year, right? He probably has a little bit more as far as the solo tackles, right? Mostly because he doesn't have quite as much help on the defensive line. They're using him in slightly different ways, but he's on the same track for pressures. He's on the same track for quarterback hits, maybe a little less, and sacks, right? Same in sacks, right? So he is not having a bad year. If this hip pointer injury ends up being an actual problem for him going into this Seahawks game, with the combination of potentially Abe Lucas being a better player and not injured, and a combination of maybe Oluwatimi is just a smarter, more balanced player than Connor Williams, who chose to retire at 27. All right, if you're retiring at 27 in the middle of the season, something's wrong. Right? Your heart's either not in it, or you see something in the locker room that makes you decide, I don't even want to get paid. All right, this isn't worth it. All right, there was probably something wrong with Connor Williams, the player, that made him decide to just tap out. All right, so ideally, Oluwatimi is a better player than Connor Williams was the last few games, and will perform better against the 49ers. But Nick Bosa is still going to be as good as he was last year, right? But if his hip pointer ends up being a problem, we could have a good game on the offensive line for the first time all season, right, against this 49ers team. So the combination of all of this, we could beat this 49ers team. If their special teams remains as bad as it has been, we could beat this 49ers team. We just got to stop McCaffrey. Make sure George Kittle doesn't do George Kittle things. And the big thing is, if our safeties who are now healthy can play healthy, and our linebackers can play in cohesion, they might be able to work some magic, right? Final thoughts on this game before we move on to John Schneider. Geno Smith, has not been playing well against the 49ers historically. I think he has the ability to play well, but he gets too psyched up. He gets too excited about the threat. I don't know what type of competitors you are. Pete Carroll likes to keep things kind of calm and level. It doesn't always work. I don't know what Mike McDonald is, but Geno Smith in particular, even under Pete Carroll, when he sees the 49ers, he knows that's the team to beat. And you can just see in his body language, he gets hyped up, pumped up. And I get a bit like this too, where I'm like, let's fucking go, right? We are going to tear this team a new asshole. I'm going to show them everything I have. I'm taking it seriously. And if you take it too seriously, you start pushing the ball where it shouldn't go. Your adrenaline starts to make your footwork move faster than it needs to go, right? Pete Carroll always preaches that every game is like the last game. If you're playing a bad team, if you're playing the best team of all time, it's still football. You just need to play like you've always played and respond like you've always responded, because otherwise you start to basically psych yourself out. And so I think he has historically psyched himself out when playing the 49ers. He needs to not do that if we want to beat this team. It doesn't matter if our offensive line plays better and if our linebacking core plays better, right? If he is throwing interceptions like he did against the Rams because he is too aggressive, he is going to throw the game away. Likewise, with our receiving core, half of his interceptions this season, and for a moment there, he was leading the NFL in interceptions before the bye week. Half of his interceptions were balls that bounced off of his target's hands and then went right into the hands of another defender. It's very unlikely that it's going to happen almost 5 or 6 times in a season, and it did. We cannot have guys not taking care of the ball, right? So the combination of the ball security between the players, right, the center, the quarterback, and the receivers not taking care of the ball, which they have not done the entire season, will lose us the game even if our offensive line suddenly plays like a bottom 10 unit, right? And if our linebacking core suddenly plays the way that it did at the start of the season, even half as good as it did at the start of the season, it won't matter, because if you give this 49ers team enough chances, they're going to beat you like that Tampa Bay team 23-20, and people are going to be pulling their hair out wondering, is it all over? Should we get ready for 2025? For the record, if we do lose this 49ers to this 49ers team, we still technically have a chance to reach 9 wins. It's gonna be really tight, but there's a chance, right? There's just no real room for error. So let's see if we can secure that. Okay, I want to talk more about John Schneider. I had an episode about him 2 episodes ago. We talked about his offensive line history. Let me just give you a quick gist. He became the Seahawks general manager in 2010. Including this season, John Schneider has been our general manager for 14 seasons. I used Pro Football Focus not because I'm a big fan of them, but because they have the most consistent ranking, and they rank every year since 2010. So since 2010, our offensive line ranking has historically been really, really bad. I referenced to Sharp Football too. It's always been bad. ESPN has been really bad, right? But we're going with Pro Football Focus. So we have had, with John Schneider, a bottom 6 offensive line out of the 14 seasons 6 times. That's no bueno. He's been in the league a long freaking time. I'm sorry, I misread that. Out of the 14 seasons, because we're including this season, 9 of those seasons, he has had a bottom 6 offensive line. That's really no bueno. That means our offensive line has been ranked 27th or worse 9 times. That's over half of all of his seasons as a general manager. It gets worse. Out of those 14 seasons, 5 of those, he has had a bottom 4 defensive line, which includes this season. The season with Charles Cross, the season where we got Connor Williams, and we're going to talk about that. But this season, excited for right tackle, our offensive line unit has been really healthy. And so this is not hey, we're in the middle of a rebuild problem. This is always been a problem. This is 14 years problem. If it was, he's been bottom 6 twice or 3 times, we can say that this is a one-off. If he was bottom 4 twice or 3 times, we can say that this is a one-off. But when it's half of the time or a third of the time in the case of bottom 4 or less, that's not a one-off. That's who you are. And so I want to talk about how this relates to Connor Williams, and then we're going to deep dive into this conversation that the Seahawks community has been having about what John Schneider did this offseason and how it relates to Jerome Baker and Tyrel Dodson and Connor Williams. And then most importantly, Mike McDonald and what this means for the 2025 season and the draft, and then the upcoming offseason. The Dolphins didn't want Connor Williams for a reason. Why would you not want your all-pro for a reason? Well, we used to have an all-pro at center. His name was Max Unger. I'm sure you've heard of this man. We got rid of him for Jimmy Graham, who is an all-pro tight end. He was a little younger than Max Unger, and they comparable pay, technically. But Max Unger fit our scheme. Jimmy Graham did not fit our scheme because he couldn't block, but we'll change our scheme for him. But on top of that, not only did we give up Max Unger for Jimmy Graham, we also gave a first-round pick. So you're not valuing the center position. You're not valuing him like that. We then replaced Max Unger with, I say, a box of scraps, but literally we replaced him with defensive lineman in Drew Nowak, who had never played center in his life. It was supposed to be Christian Sicoli, a guy who would have been the most athletic center to play ever, but he didn't even get a chance to try. And then it was just a constant rotation ever since until we brought in Connor Williams, who then retires mid-season through the year that we bring him in. So bookend all pros. And for the record, John Schneider did not draft Max Unger. That was the previous general manager, the one just before. We have seen a pattern of John Schneider not necessarily being able to evaluate not just centers, offensive linemen, and also not being willing to pay them. If I recall, there might be another one, but the only offensive lineman that John Schneider has paid that we've drafted and then he decided to retain was Justin Britt. You might say J.R. Sweezy. He actually let J.R. Sweezy go. J.R. Sweezy then came back after a couple years. He spent time with teams like the Cardinals, right? James Carpenter left. Russell Okun went to the Chargers. Right? So Max Unger, he let walk by trading him away. And so we bring in this guy, Connor Williams, and there had to have been a reason that the Dolphins didn't want him. That John Schneider couldn't see. The last few years, our Seahawks offensive line picks have actually been fairly good. And that has a lot to do with the new scouting staff that we brought in. Some of the scouting responsibilities weren't necessarily taken away from John Schneider, but they were reevaluated. Why am I forgetting his name right now? Steve Hutchinson. Seahawks brought in gold jacket offensive lineman Steve Hutchinson to start evaluating players for our scouting department and say, hey, I really like this kid. You should consider drafting Damian Lewis. And so then the Seahawks drafted Damian Lewis and ended up being a really good player. You know who the Seahawks did not pay? They did not pay Damian Lewis, who's playing for the Panthers right now. And while the Panthers are not a good team, their offensive line is actually playing pretty good. And when you put the right and left guards together, he's a top 15, top 10 guard. Which when he played for us, he was a top 15, top 10 guard. A lot goes into those grades, but sure, based off of how we're playing right now, it'd be really nice to have a top 15 guard. Regardless of how you feel about Damian Lewis, I sure would like to have a top 15 guard right now. But we let him go, and we then make a trade to bring in Connor Williams, who was supposed to be an all-pro, and I'm like, okay, it makes sense. We're going to take the money that we would have paid there, and we're going to bring in this guy. And he plays horribly. But when you listen to Dolphins fans, they weren't sad to see him go because they didn't think he was an all-pro. They thought it was the talent around him mixed with a scheme that took a lot of pressure off of the center that made him look good. They thought he had trouble controlling the ball. They didn't think he made good calls at the line, which was made up for by Tua being able to have good escapism and then also an incredibly explosive run game. And I kind of see it now, right? If we had an incredibly explosive run game on the outside, which is what the Dolphins do, Connor Williams could just go man up on a guy, and it doesn't matter if he gets blown by because, Kenneth Walker would already be 10 yards down the field. I would very much like us to have not brought him in. And I was excited to bring him in. I didn't break down tape of him, and I probably should have, because then I would have seen the writing on the wall. The last two games in particular, the statements I were making about him is it feels like he's betting money on the Seahawks to lose. Based off of how he was playing, it was some of the worst play I had seen out of him all season. And then when he retired, I'm like, that's not really a surprise. I would expect him to want the rest of his paycheck for the season, but he just tapped out. And so we get Oluwatimi. But I don't know what went into the scouting of this player to make the trade. And it wasn't a Mike McDonald thing. There are no coaches on our current roster that have a connection to the Dolphins. There are no players on the offensive line that have a connection to the Dolphins. This is purely a John Schneider's department thing. So what happened? Why is it that for 14 years now, he cannot evaluate the value of an offensive lineman and whether or not he should keep a player, let a player like Damian Lewis or Max Unger or name a player go, or bring in talent that is going to fall apart. Let's talk about the transactions that he made this offseason and see how we got here and see if this argument holds true. The argument that fans are making of him, saying, well, he didn't have a chance to build the team that Mike Macdonald wanted because Mike Macdonald was too busy building a coaching staff. I have said repeatedly, Mike Macdonald already knew who he wanted on defense. He has a connection to Leslie Frazier. He has a connection to Kirk Olivadotti. He actually does have a connection to Aiden Durd through the Falcons, which then goes to Kirk Olivadotti. He has a connection to why is my name blanking right now? Our defensive line coach. The name's eluding me. I apologize. He has connections to various positions along our defensive coaching staff, right? That go back since he was a coach with the Georgia Bulldogs. The real thing is he didn't necessarily know who our offensive coaching staff was. If you remember, Grubb was originally going to be a head coach, I believe in Alabama. Took the job, then thought about it, got an offer to go to Seattle, came to Seattle, now he's here. And so there can be an argument about, hey, I didn't get a chance to build the offense the way that I want. But he let players like Damian Lewis go beforehand. So let's look at this. Courtesy of ESPN. For the record, Mike Macdonald was hired January 31st, 2024. In January, here are the transactions that were made. January 1st, Matt Goettel was signed, along with Christian Young, and then Hamaclaire Rashed to the practice squad. You can also see that they were signed again to the practice squad on the 2nd. You can also see on January 3rd, Phil Haynes was designated to return from injured reserve to the practice squad. January 8th, they signed Le'Veon Bell, Matt Goettel, Bryant Koback, Tyrell Mabry, Jonathan Sutherland, and then Kobe White, and then Aesop Winston Jr. to future contracts for 2024, right? Getting ready for the 90-man roster. Then Mike Macdonald was signed. For February, no transactions were made. They got Jay Harbaugh as a special teams coordinator, right? There's multiple Harbaugh connections for Mike Macdonald, so it made sense. And then they had Charles London, who was brought in as the quarterback's coach. March is when things start to get interesting for transactions as far as the defense in particular. We have Jamal Adams released, Quandre Diggs released, and then Will Dissly released. Adams went to the Titans. It's not there anymore. I don't remember what happened to Diggs. And then Will Dissly is currently on the Chargers, and he is doing well. We released Byron Monet. I don't know where he is. Nick Harris was signed. Obviously not on the team. Pharaoh Brown at tight end was signed. Then on March 15th, so this is a month and a half after Mike Macdonald, who is specialized in linebackers, came in and brought in Tyrel Dodson. They also brought in George Fant, former Seahawk, Artie Burns, and Sam Howell. with that 4th round pick and a 6th round pick from the Washington Commanders. On the 17th, they signed Jerome Baker, right? So back-to-back linebackers. We signed Tremaine Ankrum, former Ram, and then signed Jonathan Hankins and Kayvon Wallace. What I'm trying to remember is, when was Ryan Grubb signed to the Seahawks? February 13th. Right? Point being, the argument is, well, Mike McDonald was too busy building a coaching staff to talk to John Schneider for John Schneider to go out there and get players. Well, Tyrel Dodson signed on the 15th. March 17th, Jerome Baker. That's a month and a half after Mike McDonald, who's the linebacker dude, the defense guy, was brought in. George Fant, tackle, who was supposed to be the starter because Abe Lucas was expected to be out, he gets brought in literally a month after our offensive coordinator gets brought in. One of the first things you're probably doing after you bring in your offensive coordinator is having a conversation about what type of players you want brought in. And so I don't think that conversation holds. This idea that Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb didn't get to talk to John Schneider because they obviously had a month before they started signing players that were intended to be starters. I don't think that conversation holds at all. But it's a fun conversation to have. How much time do you really need? One of those players, and actually no, 2 of those players, Jerome Baker, gone. Tyrel Dodson, gone. If you go towards the end of this, and again, I have links to everything we talk about in the description below, Connor Williams was the last transaction we made before the season started, if I remember correctly. He was like right there. It's lost. Never mind. Don't quote me on that one. I'm not going to find the exact thing because we're not going through this whole thing. I thought it was the last one because he's the last transaction that we made because they announced retirement in November. When did we actually... How about we do this? Connor. Oh. Why is he not showing up on as another transaction? You learn something new every day. When was he brought in? We're doing it live. Seahawks trade for Connor Williams. Oh, we signed Connor Williams on Sunday. That was August 11th, so that was just before the season started. Yeah, plenty of time. Plenty of time. Anyways, I don't think that argument holds sand. I don't think the argument that John Schneider's off-season signings were purely a John Schneider thing holds stand. He was too busy building a staff so he couldn't be involved in the draft is true. Byron Murphy, Christian Haynes, Tyrese Knight, all them boys. That's a John Schneider thing, and I think that those are great picks. I think that those are just smart picks. The offseason stuff, who he decided to keep, right? He didn't keep Damian Lewis. He brought in Tyrel Dodson and Jerome Baker, right? Like, we give him a lot of praise for being able to grease a palm. I don't know if that's actually been a successful aspect to his management style. Like, yeah, we give him credit for bringing in Dwayne Brown. But he brought in Dwayne Brown because his ability to build an offensive line sucked. His ability to manage the cap of an offensive line sucked. Like, yeah, we give him credit for getting Quandre Diggs. But he brought in Quandre Diggs because his ability to manage the safety room and rebuild the defensive back room after Scott McLaughlin wasn't there to help him build the team sucked. Right? He can find diamonds in the rough. He can go get an Ernest Jones or a Quandre Diggs from a bad team who wants draft capital. But I hate to break it to you, there's a lot of bad teams out there really willing to get rid of good players if you give them a couple draft picks. Can you build a position group? Our defensive line group right now should be performing better than it actually is, considering the amount of capital and weight he's put into it. Our offensive line has been mismanaged for 14 years now. There are some trends, and so the conversation has been Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, or John Schneider. Well, yeah, some of it is Russell Wilson, some of it was Pete Carroll, and a lot of it was John Schneider. John Schneider could not build an offensive line for Russell Wilson. When you look at Russell Wilson, he makes things hard on offensive line. But it wasn't like he was being asked to throw the ball 50 times a game. Now we have a quarterback being asked to throw 30 to 50 times a game. And it looks really, really bad regardless. When you put Russell Wilson on the Broncos last year with a good offensive line, they just needed a run game. And they just happened to have a really bad defense. No receivers to speak of. You put him on the Steelers this year. George Pickens playing out of his freaking mind, but I'll tell you what, that offensive line is holding up. Russell has all day to throw. He doesn't need to be doing loop-de-loops. It doesn't seem to matter that he's not as athletic because he has all freaking day to throw. Never had that in Seattle. And I'm not saying we should have kept Russell Wilson, but I will say that we probably should have kept Pete Carroll and let John Schneider go instead. Because at least John Schneider hasn't necessarily proven that he can build a really good team without the help of other people around him. Scott McLaughlin built a really good team when he got here in Seattle and advised our offensive line. The actual players being evaluated were horrible until Steve Hutchinson got involved. And then those good players, he still won't pay to keep them. There are good aspects to them. But if you're willing to let Pete Carroll go, you know, maybe get rid of the guy who is not supplying him with good talent. You got to have two of them together. I don't know. Mike Macdonald, I'm still not sold on. I don't think he's got the maturity. Not saying he's immature, but I don't think he has the experienced maturity to be a head coach yet. And that's something that he's going to learn, and he's probably learning the hard way. And that's partially why Leslie Frazier is there as the assistant head coach. But, if this is just going to be a game where we lose against the 49ers and we lose out the rest of the season, it goes bad. Maybe the plan all along is for John Schneider to finally build the team his way, and he doesn't have Pete Carroll in his ear. This is going to be his team. This kid, Mike Macdonald, I'll build the team he wants, sure, but this is going to be my team now because I'm John Schneider. I know he always wanted to go to the Packers. There was some clause because the Packers GMs tend to build things a very specific way. Maybe he wants this to be his version of the Packers. I'm not so sold on that. I've never been sold on John Schneider. And this is part of the reason why. But the Packers, historically, since the dude named Lombardi was their coach, have had really good offensive lines. So what gives? Anyways, thank you for watching First Kick Seahawks. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Just so you know, I am no longer on Twitter. Twitter is no longer a thing. It no longer exists, so why would I be on it? You can find me on Blue Sky. Blue Sky. You can kick it with me there and the rest of the Seahawks community that congregated over there. Thank you for watching and kicking it with me. I will kick it with you tomorrow.